Well, let me introduce who's up here. At the far end there, Dr. Arne Carlsen. Arne Carlsen is the director of UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. He's an adult educator. Among others, he has worked with prisoners, with refugees, with unemployed, with people excluded from the system who've been given a second chance. Sir Faisal Hassan Abed, who was the winner of last year's prestigious WISE Award, he has set up a remarkable chain of schools in Bangladesh and is now setting them up in East Africa. 750,000 children enrolled in 25,000 BRAC schools. 70% of the children are girls. It was the WISE Prize, I think, that brought many to the full understanding of what he's achieved. I have no doubt the Nobel Peace Prize is somewhere in the offing, frankly. Somebody out there nominate him. And then Dr. Monique Canto-Sperber, she is the president of the Research University Paris, having brought together 17 of the most prestigious institutions in Paris. She's a philosopher, she's written on ethics and on contemporary moral issues. And finally, not least, Ponce Ernest Saniego. He is what WISE is all about. He is a young WISE learner of 2011, a young social entrepreneur from the Philippines, co-founder and chief executive of Outliers. He worked on innovative projects with the Asian Development Bank, Starbucks, and others, and he's just completed a degree in business administration. So that's our team. And the first question I think that we really want to resolve in Educating for Our Times, and as I say, Andreas Schleicher's presentation will weave into much of what we want to discuss, is what is learning actually for? What is it for? Arne?
Learning is for empowering the individuals, people, to live and to work in society. In UNESCO, already in the 1990s, we had a big work, a commissioned by UNESCO, the Jacques Delors report, Learning the Treasure Within, that operates with 4 pillars of learning. Learning is about learning to be, is the first pillar. Learning to be a person. Learning for personal fulfillment, the joy of learning, fulfilling your full human potential. The second pillar is learning to know, learning to learn, learning to get knowledge. And the third pillar is learning to do, meaning learning to act, to handle situations, to take actions, to increase your employability, to be able to work. And the fourth pillar is learning is about learning to live together, because we live together, and today we live together in relation also to a global citizenship. So what is learning about? I would say in UNESCO today we are trying to update, to have a critical revision of the 4 pillars, what is learning about. And I can give a first proposal, which is to look at the relationship between schools and enterprises, or formal education and workplaces.
Rather nicely brought out by that film that we saw ahead of these proceedings.
We can see there's much more focus today on also learning how to use what you learn, meaning creating a relationship between knowledge and competence development. It's no longer enough just to learn, to get knowledge, but we have a much stronger focus on how we can use it in practice, also how we can use it in workplaces.
Well, now, Ponce, you're much nearer the learning experience than we are. Can you identify with what he has said? And has your learning taught you what learning was actually about?
Well, hello. Firstly, I beg to differ. I'm not closer to learning than anybody else. I believe we're all lifelong learners. Every day we keep on learning.
I fell into that one. I fell into that trap.
But the question was...
Well, the question was your own experience of learning. Have you learnt to be? Have you learnt, I mean, the list of UNESCO targets, what do you feel learning is about?
I think I have, being a wise learner like my other fellow learners, we all have come to a point where we've sort of touched on all those 4 pillars. But the question, I guess, would be, where did I get that sort of education? Was it inside the classroom, or was it more of outside the classroom, I guess, in our cases, which I feel, of course, is a combination of both. But in the other aspects that I hope to contribute on, in addition to the 4 pillars, would be learning to create. I think was more of an experience outside the classroom, because we weren't given more opportunities to create in the classroom.
Monique, what is the philosopher's answer to what is learning for?
Learning is for having a future. There is no future without learning, without education. And I think it's true at the individual and at the collective level. Because, first, learning and education are at the root of economic growth. First, because it's a condition for further technological innovations, but at the same time, learning and education can train people properly and adequately for these people to have a real role in the society to come. I think we are doing now something which has never been done before in human history. We are teaching and educating students without knowing what kind of opportunity they will have, what kind of world they have to confront, probably a world of scarce resources and a world of environmental threats. And in this condition, it seems to me that the most important thing we have to do, being aware of the fact that we are in a world of change and constant innovation, we have to equip children with an intellectual framework which could be a real help for adapting, for dealing with complex situations. Now, of course, we have to impart knowledge and competencies, but at the same time, we have to train minds, people to be able to, so that people will be able to react to a very complex world. I think it's very important. And I will add that we are living in a world of deeply rooted identities. Of course, human beings can live without identity of some sort, we know that. But at the same time, we have to live together in this world to come. So we need to be aware, and that's a very important thing to teach children. We need to be aware that we share common values, we share common commitment beyond cultural belongings. But at the same time, it is true that one of the things education can do now is to teach children to abstract, in a way, to detach themselves from the particular space or particular time they belong to. There is a very concrete application to that. Make children understand the necessity of some kind of environmental concern. They have to put themselves in an intellectual position of someone living 30 years, 40 years after us, and we will be in a position to contemplate the world we have been left after us. So it's very important for children to be able to enlarge their minds and to be able to endorse the other people's perspective, and of course other temporal, to actualize different temporal times. And of course, it was often stressed that education has to be envisaged as a kind of long life process. But for this long life process be possible, basic education is very important. He has to provide a kind of block which keeps alive not only the capacity for further learning, but the desire to learn, to keep on learning. That's very important now.
I'm really taken with your answer, because you are really futuristic, looking forward all the time to the way in which the world is going to change for this generation. And yet my generation was actually trying to learn from the past. we were trying to find out what it was like to be around in Shakespeare's time. And identify with some of the characters. Well, that now seems to be a bit of a waste of time. What I'm wondering from you, Sir Fazl, is whether you feel that the rest of the panel are in a rather luxurious position to make choices about quite what education is about, because what you're about is producing any education at all.
Absolutely. When you are in a country where less than 50% of the population is illiterate, you are trying to get your large numbers of children who are out of school into school. So basically providing access to education and then trying to provide a quality education. So I remember when I started our program in Bangladesh, I wanted the various people in leading position in Bangladesh, politicians, social workers, writers, poets, artists, to come and advise me as to how to develop curriculum for poorest children. And we had a number of meetings. One artist, I remember, he said that you must teach children how to draw and how to paint. Then they will develop observational skills and so on. So I said that, you know, the poorest children won't have pencils and crayons and lots of papers to practice painting, because our budget was $20 per child per year, and we couldn't afford all this. So he said then he quietened down a bit and then said, well, what you could teach is get teachers to tell them to observe how a frog jumps into a pond and then come and draw it next day. So you don't always have to use pencils and crayons and papers to teach observation. You can teach it from nature. So like that, we have developed our curriculum and materials and methods in such a way that it costs as little as possible, and it provides a quality education for the children that we try to get into our schools. So basically, we use women, housewives in villages who have got 10 to 12 years of education. We give them 2 weeks of training initially. Then we provide 1 day training every month and try to upgrade their skills as they go on teaching. So like that, we are providing a fairly high quality education to poorest children, and they complete 4 years of primary education, which in our national system, they complete in 5 years. And we tend to do better than the state system in the annual examination that our children take at the end of 5 years of primary education.
And of course you have a huge advantage because you're teaching mainly girls, and they are easier.
There's also another problem. We had the
true?
girls
It
were
is
neglected
true,
in our society, and we insisted that at least 60% of the children must be girls when we set up a school. So this was one of the things that we have also tried to. So as a result of which, in Bangladesh today, we have got more girls in primary schools than boys. So this has never happened in South Asia before, and this has happened in Bangladesh in the last few years. So that's one area that I think was very important.
Let me pause you there, because Ponce, you wanted to come in.
I was just wondering that maybe an aspect of educating for our times in that context would be educating for a time where inequality exists in many ways. In one aspect that Dr. Carlsen pointed out, one pillar, learning to live together means learning to live together in a world where inequality exists, and those who have access to education would want to help others who do not.
Well, I mean, that is absolutely the hope. I don't know to what extent you have any difficulty persuading somebody of 10 or 12 years education who hasn't sought to be a teacher to be a teacher. I mean, that's what you have to do, isn't it? You go into the community, you find one person who's educated, but who doesn't necessarily want to be a teacher, and you get them to be a teacher.
Well, right now we are facing quite a lot of problems in South Sudan. South Sudan has just become independent. So it was part of Sudan, and most of the teaching took place in Arabic. Now South Sudan has decided to teach in English. So they have changed the language. So the only teachers you can find in South Sudan now who are ready to teach in primary schools are teachers who were in camps either in Kenya or Uganda, and who had some English education. So you have to basically are restricted to finding teachers from this community who have had some English. The other problem is, so if you want to expand South Sudan program in the sense that if you want to take all the children into school, then you have to, I suppose, import some teachers from Kenya and Uganda to be able to teach for the next generation. Once one generation has gone through, then of course it will be okay.
Well, now, when we asked this question online, this question of what is learning actually for, we took a poll and we asked the question, I think it's going to come up right now, is really learning for preparing learners for job markets, and that's the major goal of education. Have we got that up there? Yeah, we have. Preparing learners for job markets is the major goal of education, and 44% disagreed, 39% agreed, and 17% neither agreed nor disagreed. That's rather interesting, is it not? Because it suggests people do not think, actually, in a majority, that learning is about getting a job. Would that be right, Arnie? I mean, a lot of people, if you ask them in the street, what's learning really for? It will just enable me to get a job.
I think most governments today would think that it's very important to have an education system that develops skills and competences that matches the needs in the labor market, as we also just heard in the presentation by Andreas Leicher from the OECD. But it is also clear that most people think that education and learning is very much related to their positioning themselves, to fulfilling their human potential, increasing their capability of living in society, relating to other people. And in fact, for very many people, the moral values that are transferred in education are very important. Values like peace, democracy, tolerance, intercultural understanding, gender equity, and so on. But I would say the title of our session here is A New Collaborative Deal for Education. And the New Deal, that was a term forged in the 1930s in the United States of America. It was a response to a big depression in the economy. So I was asking myself when coming here, is this the title because we now have a deep or a big depression in education, and we now need to develop a new deal to respond to this crisis or depression? And it is evident if we look to the achievement of the education for all goals that many countries will not achieve. Some countries will, others will not, and it is evident that we could speak about crisis, depression in relation to the EFA goals. So a deal has some partners or some stakeholders, and I would say that a new deal would imply stakeholders like the learners, like the world of work, of course the education sector, governments, the institutions, but also entities like the learning cities, because much of educational policy that could be formulated as a response to the not achieving of many education systems maybe could be taken up at the municipality level in the form of learning cities or learning rural districts and so on. So I think the stakeholders in a new deal are very different from the stakeholders in the old deal.
The word collaboration is a very highly charged one, because of course one of the difficulties is that globally the inequalities in access to education are absolutely massive, but they're also massive inside nation states. And I mean, I'm on dangerous territory here, Monique, because you come from what I think we would call quite an elitist circumstance. And the question I would ask you is whether it's realistic to think that people who have struggled to get into your now vast research institute. They've had to work extremely hard and the rest of it. Are they really going to be interested now in having to devote some proportion of their time to collaborating with people who are not having the same opportunities? Now, there has been this program in Western Europe called Teach First, which is also being rolled out in India, which does get graduates straight into teaching without teacher training and the rest of it. But it's minuscule by comparison with the need. Am I asking you a question that you feel you can answer?
I think what you are saying is a necessity, you know. This elite institution which exists in several parts of the world are not institutions as such, they are institutions for certain kind of values. And the main thing is to protect this value and to open them up, you know, to make more and more people have access to them. That's the point. You know, it's not an institutional form we are preserving. It's some kind of a high-level education, and we'd like very much that many more students could benefit of them.
But aren't the pressures moving the other way? I mean, for example, student fees in some countries are now getting so high that a lot of people who might have gone to university are thinking of not going to university. So in fact, the squeeze is going in the opposite direction.
Oh yes, that's a big issue. That's not the question in France, because higher education is free, but without any kind of fee. But at the same time, France managed to develop some kind of oligarchic system too, which is very far from the democratization of higher education. For example, to take this example, that it aimed to at some time. Let's take an example. For 50 years ago in France, I just take this case because really it's a case in point. Only 5% of a generation had access to at the baccalaureate, which was the way of being admitted to university as higher education. 50 years later, there are 70% to have access to universities. So it's a very good record. We may say 14 times more people are just getting in universities. But does it mean that there are 40 times more students who have the benefit of a very good education? I wouldn't say that. Mm-hmm. So something turned wrong somewhere. First, there were many more students, but the staff and the amount of money devoted to university was not raised the same way. And in the same time, you know, in this very so-called democratic system, this kind of system managed to develop some kind of elite tracks which are very close to everyone else. So in the outcome, it was not a very good result. I want to take this example because it shows that democratization and egalitarianism doesn't mean necessarily equity. Mm-hmm. So the best way to cope with that and to deal with that kind of problem is to start very early on, you know, at primary school, because that's the way, and that's the time at which the main inequalities in access to good education are devised. And then to be very careful about the fact that to help students at the individual basis to go as far as they can go, you know, given their motivations, given their talents, and to provide for bridges, because some students want to be very good at school a little later than others. Yeah. And all kind of academic decisions are taken too early in life, and the time for life at which this decision open opportunity for students are not the same for all students. Right. So bridges, the possibility of going as far as each student can go, and a very strong concern for primary education.
Right. Well, before we just go out to the audience, which we will do in the next question, I just want to ask you one final question right now, Fazel. Looking at the educational world from where you are, morally, who should be delivering this great change in education we're looking for? Is it the NGO sector? Is it the state? Is it the private sector? Who do you look to when you're where you are?
Well, I think it's the state's responsibility to provide education, and it should be state provision should include everybody. And I think right now there is a lot of debate about whether private sector to get into education, provide education, but it's to provide education with equity in the sense that every child has access to education, a quality education. It should be a state responsibility, and that usually where state is very active in providing education, the citizens do well.
Anyone disagree? Good, we've laid a benchmark then. The state is in charge when it comes to delivering. I see you shaking your head.
The state gives the guidelines, but I do believe in individual responsibilities and the responsibility of communities. You know, the institution and different individual initiatives or social initiatives can help with the kind of state giving broad directions.
Arne?
Sorry?
I think the future we want in relation to education is moving from education for all to lifelong learning for all. And lifelong learning for all involves also other stakeholders. So the education sector will have, I think, to reach the hand out to other sectors and collaborate with them. There's so much learning going on in the health sector, in the world of work, etc. And I don't think we can only, in the future, consider learning that happens in the formal education system. We need to have a holistic approach, I think, that also integrates the non-formal learning that happens in workplaces, in non-governmental organizations, civil society organizations, and also all the learning that happens in the family when you go to the library, borrow a book, and read it. I don't think any, or maybe very few countries in the future will be able to afford to pay develop a formal education system that can cater for all the learning needs of society.
Okay, I think the consensus then is that the state is in charge of setting it all up and regulating it, but that the many other resources will have to be drawn upon to deliver it. Right, we've got questions from the audience. We've got microphones everywhere, so there's no excuse not to be able to get heard. Let me look around and see what hands are up. Anybody want to take this? Yeah, in the turquoise in the middle there, please, which would be number 4, I think, probably. Right in the middle of your first row there, just behind the technicians. In turquoise, down the front here, in the middle. Oh, well, then is this lady here with the turquoise? Maybe I've got the color wrong, green. Well, I'm learning. And let's see, other questions. If you keep your hand up in that row there, yeah, then that microphone will get up there. 7, could you go and reach the lady at the top there? Right, number 4.
Thank you very much. My name is Angela Little from the University of London. If I may, I'd like to pose a question to Andreas Schleicher to take us back to that excellent presentation. Andreas said that how much countries spend on education explains no more than 20% of the variation in student achievement outcomes. Of all the other factors that Andreas mentioned in his presentation, which one explained more than 20% of the variation in achievement outcomes? And secondly, how much of the total variation in outcomes was explained by all of the factors that he looked at taken together? Thank you.
A marvelously concise question. Andreas, you happy to?
Thank you very much. In fact, with our data on PISA, we can account today for about 80% of the performance variation of schools in the industrialized world. So data have become a very powerful predictor of what distinguishes higher and less well-performing education system. Volume of spending is about 20%. When you look at the spending choices that countries make, for example, how they decide between paying teachers well or having long hours of instruction or buying wonderful facilities and so on, you can account a lot more than when you just look at the volume of spending. It's basically the kind of choices you make. And when you look at this on balance across countries, one of the things you see is that high-performing nations generally tend to prioritize the quality of teachers and teaching, spending that goes into quality of teaching, over things like infrastructure, class size, and those kinds of factors.
Thank you very much. Number 2, let's hear your question, please. And then we'll come to number 1.
My name is Yara Darwish, and I'm actually a wise learner from Qatar. And I have a question that I want to address to Dr. Monique. Like, I appreciate your optimism, and I see myself as an optimist as well. But you mentioned that you're dealing with deeply rooted identities. How can you ensure that these strong identities, particularly cultural identities, are strengthened in a span of like 10 or 20 years, the ones you were talking about? Because it would be a shame to have diversity erode with the establishment of stronger globalized ties within the educational system.
Monique?
We are sharing a world, and it imposes requirements not only for the sharing of resources, but for the sharing of common understanding and mutual respect too. We have to keep this world going, and I think the best way to do that is to make some progress in the way of understanding each other. And I was insisting on the fact that common values and common commitments were very important. It doesn't mean that these values are defined somewhere and has to be imposed elsewhere. But I think it's very important that these values must be focused on the development of human intelligence and human being. It was said at the beginning of the discussion that education was made for empowerment. I do believe in the notion of empowerment of individual in a collectivity and in a society. And each society, each culture, reach that ideal in a different way. But somehow there are common features in that, giving individual liberty of choice, giving individual the possibility of defining himself or herself. And I think that if we give so much importance to education, it's because of that, because we want individuals who are able to understand the complexity of the world, who are able to work for keeping this world alive, whatever the threat and difficulties which are looming. And because we think that in a way we are responsible for the capacity given to each human being to develop itself as much as he can in a kind of a specific situation he is born in. So that was the reason. And I come back to some issue which was brought up at the beginning of the discussion. We discussed on the importance of a general framing of the mind, general intellectual quality that every mind has to acquire to adapt to the workplace and to be properly trained for the workplace, even if we don't have any idea of the kind of work which is being asked for him or for her. And at the same time with the relation with our tradition and our past versus our future, is as if now we have to train children with the prospect of having two minds in one. One mind for the general education and general intellectual qualities, and one mind for the specific knowledge, specific abilities, which are very important, especially in the technological world we enter in. And at the same time, we have two minds, a mind for the past and traditions and all our belongings, and a mind for universality. And of course, with all that, we have to live harmoniously, even if one mind challenges the other. But in the way, you know, when I was thinking of that, I was just wondering, but was it not the case at the beginning of the Renaissance, at the end of the 15th century or the beginning of 16th century? They were discovering a new world, all kind of open possibilities before man. You know, as Descartes said at the beginning of the 17th century, master of nature, of course, is not the ideal we entertain now. We have to be master of the world we have created against nature in most cases. But still, let that question aside. But they were, in a way, from the past towards the future, and they were from what they belong for universality. Well, we have the same agenda.
Lovely. I'm now going to take a few questions at once because otherwise we won't get the full flavor of the questioning that's going on. So number one here, but I see the hand here. If anybody's able to reach this, if you could keep your hand up. It's coming to you now. Yeah, we'll come down. If keep your hand up, that's it, right. So these two questions next, please, and then number three. So we'll take three questions and see if we can make sense of them. One.
Hello. Is this on?
It's good. You're on.
Hello.
Yep.
I'm Sonia Darlington. I teach at a small liberal arts college in Beloit, Wisconsin. And my question deals with the paradoxical goals that education has. How do we pursue creative innovation in education and simultaneously encourage a stability that allows us to do more than prize the clinical observation of death? And here I mean thousands of biological organisms, as in seeds, languages, as in terms of African languages, and cultures such as in neighborhood schools.
Interesting question. Let's take this one here, please, which is number 2.
Hello, I'm Montek from Ritsumeikan University in Japan. My question can be answered by anyone from the panel. How do you see the balance between hard work and fun in learning? And I ask this particularly because some of the newer pedagogic tools appear to be more fun than hard work. And secondly, the balance between reverence and irreverence. I find that some of the most creative work from my laboratory has come from an irreverent question. Thank you.
Really lovely question. Fantastic. And the number 3.
Good evening. I'm Oscar Becerra from Peru in South America. In my country, an evaluation of teachers showed that less than 2% could perform basic arithmetic operation of teachers, and more than 60% couldn't understand what they read. What can be done with such quality of teachers when you cannot change that in the short term?
That is a huge challenge, and in a way, I'll come to you in a moment on it and see whether we can make sense of it. I'm going to ask you first. I loved the idea of this balance between reverence and irreverence, and the balance between hard work and fun. Did you find it?
What do you mean by irreverence?
Irreverence, I mean actually, possibly saying, hang on a minute. I mean, challenging in a very creative way, perhaps, and in a way which doesn't necessarily honor the quality of the question.
You mean?
You know what reverence is, don't you? Reverence is obviously...
Yes.
Yeah, but irreverence is exactly the opposite of that.
And how do we design education to cope with reverence and irreverence?
What I wondered was whether, in your educational experience, you had found the balance between reverence and irreverence. And whether you'd found the balance between hard work and fun.
Okay, I'll answer the hard work and fun first. It's easier to understand the question.
Yeah. Maybe I have to ask the philosopher. You better carry on, yeah. Hard work and fun.
I think it's not a question of either or. I would prefer to work hard and have fun doing it. With wise learners, we work a lot, but we find fun and fulfillment in it. It shouldn't be a choice, I think.
But in the Philippines, before you got to WISE, did you manage to have fun learning?
I think that's the reason why my colleagues and I at school at the time co-founded what we did, working with NGOs. It's because we didn't find fulfillment in what we did. We have passion in business, in marketing, but we wanted to find meaning and fulfillment in it, so we decided to use it to work with NGOs.
Arnie, did you find anything in the question about creativity and the clinical obsession with death? Which I thought was rather an interesting question, but I couldn't see how to answer it. Down here at number 1, she asked us an interesting question about creativity, the tension between creativity and the clinical observation of death in seeds. And
I think the question of creativity also is related to the question about distinguishing between relevant and irrelevant learning. And we can establish educational programs with a lot of relevant learning. But in fact, what is also requested from the workplace is work skills in relation to negotiating, to multitasking, to cooperating with others, and also to be able to have a very nice culturally based communication with people. So it's also very relevant, even for an engineer or for a medical doctor, to learn about La Renaissance or to learn about Shakespeare. So I think the question about how you develop creativity with the help or based on an educational program is related to distinguish between relevant and irrelevant learning. But very often, in fact, we will find that what from the first phase would look as irrelevant is what in the end will be considered to be the most relevant learning of all. So this has to be really investigated, what is relevant and irrelevant, and how do we create creativity. But it's evident creativity has something to do with the fulfillment of the personal human potential just as much as the content or subject in a school.
So Faisal, clearly the questioner from Peru is further down the line than your projects are. They've reached a point of frustration. Now, you may well reach that same point of frustration, because you may not have good enough teachers coming up the line to take over when these kids start getting to a much more developed stage. So what's your answer to him?
Well, that's indeed the problem that we find, that once our children gets out of primary schools, they go to a secondary school, which is even worse. And so what I've been trying to do in Bangladesh, at least, is to trying to get secondary school teachers training going as a separate project to try and improve quality of education in secondary schools.
You've added East Africa. You've added East Africa. Could you add Latin America as well then to your project? Could you pop down there and start a teacher training program?
Of course, of course. But this is a special project that we have taken up. Out of 18,000 secondary schools, we have taken up 3,000 to try and improve quality. And we are trying out not only teachers training, but also mentoring and other ways of improving quality teaching learning in these schools.
We only have a few minutes left, and in fact under 5. So I'm going to take one more cluster of questions. There's a question right in the middle of the front of the third row back here. And any other questions while I'm there? Yes, number 1. Let's take you, number 1, while somebody's getting a microphone. Well, I suppose as you're there, I'll take you 3. I'm sorry to distress you, but I can't take you. Right. 1 and 3, and then I think we're going to have to call it a day. 1. Yes, questioner, number 1.
My question is to Sir Faisal. Okay, so I was just a little frustrated and disturbed about your comment about education being the responsibility of the state. I would be very glad if you could probably elaborate more on that, because as a wise learner, I have been very motivated and empowered to try and make a change in my country when it comes to education. So what do you think my role is as an individual if the responsibility of education is for the state, and how can we collaborate with the state for that matter to provoke some kind of change? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll just take this questioner 3.
I'm Caroline Anyonuevo. I work with Arne at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. The theme of this session is educating for our times. And since this morning, we have heard about the importance of the teachers. And again, we heard from OECD how teachers are key for quality education. But on the other hand, we know that the status of teachers all over the world are declining. Teachers are getting low and lower salaries. That's why in my country, in the Philippines, teachers are leaving in droves to work overseas. So my question is to Sir Hassan, how do you keep teachers motivated, given that they have low status, They're not having good training opportunities. What is your strategy for poor countries? Because we've been hearing about countries like Singapore, Finland, Japan with high expenditures in education. But what are countries like Bangladesh going to do so that you are ensuring, we are ensuring that teachers who are key to quality education are really going to be able to deliver quality education?
Well, you've got two questions to answer.
Well, indeed. I think the reason I said that the state has got the primary responsibility for primary and secondary education is because of equity, in the sense that many children are now deprived from primary education because they can't access secondary schools, for primary and secondary schools. So access to children is absolutely essential. There's the other question of private schools providing quality education at a cost. And of course, they can be afforded only by well-to-do people, families. So I'm saying that although these provisions are there, they should continue, but then states should try and provide...
What do you tell her to do then? I mean, she wants to play a role in Ghana in changing the educational system. And she says, well, if it's a state, how am I going to collaborate?
Well, this is exactly what when I started primary education in Bangladesh, one of the objective of my program was, and to scale up the program, was to try and change the governmental system in such a way that they also provide quality education. But unfortunately, I haven't been very successful yet. But then we still continue to work with the government and try and improve quality of education.
And let me butt in and very briefly ask you to move on to the other question, which is how do you retain a good teacher?
How do you motivate teachers?
Yeah. How do you retain them? I mean, they're losing them overseas to other people.
Well, as we provide education to poorest children, so we really can't spend a lot of money per child per year. Our cost is about $34 per child per year. We try and take teachers in the villages in which we set up a school. And in the village, if there is a housewife with 10 to 12 years of education, we normally have 3 to 4 candidates for teacher's job. We provide them training initially for 2 weeks, and then every month, 1-day refresher course, and continuous supervision of their classes twice a week, and provide supportive supervision to try and improve their skills. So what they get at the end of it is that a satisfaction of teaching a group of children from their own village that keeps them motivated. Their status in the whole village goes up, so that also keeps them motivated. So we find that teachers are quite well satisfied with the kind of work they do and the kind of supportive supervision BREC provides to them. And continuously, we try to improve their skills so that they can go to higher classes, and as the children go to higher classes, they also teach at a higher class level, and ultimately become a very good high quality teacher. So we actually have been very, very well satisfied with the teachers' motivation as well as their performance in our school system. So we have not found any real problems in creating incentives for teachers to do their best in our system.
Thank you very much, and thank you for some terrific questions. And I'm sorry we didn't get to each of them, but I'll try and call you in my next session. But a really stimulating period now. It really started by Andreas Schleicher with a really fabulous range across the way education is changing and the way we can change it. And then the panel here, I personally thought that Dr. Canto Sperber's vision of having students come into one's responsibility, whose future we have no way of knowing, this idea they could live for 100 years, and we have no idea of what will happen in those 100 years. I suppose in the end that if we visited teachers in the 18th century, we'd find them saying the same thing. But would it be as drastic as we feel it to be now because of the fantastic pace of technology? Anyway, enormous challenges, and we've ranged across a lot, and I think left a whole lot of balloons in the air that we can chase and pursue in these coming hours and the next 2 days. But on your behalf, I'd like to thank Dr. Arne Carlson, Safaza Hassan Abed, Dr. Monique Cantos-Berber, and Ponce Ernest Saniego, and above all you for being a terrific extension of the WISE experience. Thank you very much indeed.